Hey Lucy,
Hi, Reese. How are you?
I'm really good, thank you. Great to see you again, and I'm excited for our second episode in our little webinar series.
Yeah, me too. This one's going to be a little bit more in depth, I think.
Yes, I think we're going to get into the meat of some things.
Definitely.
Specifically, I think we're looking to talk about the NTP, the National Tutoring Programme, today, and I think it would be amazing if maybe you, as the expert in the room, give us maybe a bit of a background on it. From what it is, and maybe your view on how tutoring has maybe changed and what's brought about the National Tutor Programme. How does that sound?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, wholly, like the NTP is a fantastic initiative from the government that looks to put tutoring at the forefront of the national catch-up plan. I know in the last webinar I said I wasn't a fan of the word catch-up.
Yeah.
We really want to try and sort of, if you tell a child that they need to catch up, it's got negative connotations. So I think of it as more of like a re-engagement with education after such a turbulent sort of 18 months during the COVID, schools being closed and being opened. But the NTP is wholly putting tutoring at the forefront of that catch-up plan. And to me, as part of the tuition industry, that's a fantastic thing, because we've worked very hard, obviously, as an industry, to sort of dispel any misconceptions about tutoring over the years. And this kind of view that school and tutoring are sort of separate entities, and even so much so like that some people even think that they're almost like working against each other. We've done a couple of sort of blogs about that. I think we'll probably link them under this sort of video as well. But it really is that time now where we sort of think, actually, that it's time that we all started. We've all got the same want. We all want the children to excel and reach their potential, and for education to be fun and engaging. And so in that sense, it's been hugely important for the tutoring industry that the government have made this sort of, not realization, but this kind of public statement of kind of support, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like a real endorsement, I think, to it as a, not just a sideshow to teaching, but a formal part of the education, offering out there.
Totally.
It's really exciting to see. And because, I mean, this isn't the first time round, is it? It's been sort of, it launched last year, was it? Originally the first launch, is that right?
Yeah, so it was launched in sort of October 2020, obviously after the sort of turbulent pandemic sort of year. They initially chose 32 providers. Obviously, there was a tendering process, and it was run by the EEF and sort of Nesta and a couple of very well-established and well-respected educational sort of endowment foundations. And the money was, sort of given by the government, and it has been a kind of a success somewhat, but there's some big changes for phase two. And that's the interesting thing. So obviously, as lots of people will have read about, Randstad, who are now in charge. So it's not going to be organised by the EEF and Nesta, it's going to now be organised by Randstad. And they've put out a new tender process for obviously organisations to sort of put forward that they would like to get involved with a form and things. And I think this second round, there are some quite big changes in the sense that obviously the NTP is fairly limited, as we've spoken about before, in terms of its provision of tutoring. They really, really place emphasis on the 1 to 3 model of tutoring, which obviously, as lots of people will know, with my kind of ethos or belief about the education, like in tutoring, it's not necessarily what I would say would be, if we're looking to make the biggest impact, and hit the most children with high quality learning. Obviously, one-to-one is great, but obviously, the government's only got a limited amount of funding, so that's not going to be the focus for a sort of a national program like this. But I think it's interesting that up until now, and obviously we need to wait and see what Randstad really focus in on in terms of the providers that they sort of get onto the scheme this time. It seems that there really is this still emphasis on the 1-to-3 model of tuition.
It's quite prescriptive again, isn't it, in terms of what they want, and it's far cry from how many have you done in one session at once?
Well, some of they're not the same thing in terms of tutoring.
No.
They're master classes like creative writing. I've had over 400 on a lesson,
which is possible now as well with all the technology. We don't have to have we being present in a room. We can expand how we're delivering education now. That's the exciting thing, with Zoom and Teams and all these other technologies coming out now.
Yeah. And I think as experts in the online provision of tutoring and education, I think we need to demonstrate the possibilities that are available, because I think when it's very easy for school educators to look in on the online space and sort of say, hey, we can do 1-to-3 and that's great because it's more cost effective. But actually, when you understand the sort of nuances of the online education and what is actually possible, there's ways that we could utilize enabling adults like teaching assistants, doing masterclass teaching during assembly time, because we all know at schools, often they're having bubble assemblies, or that bubble assembly time has been moved into something else. There's so many possibilities. And so it's important that we see the NTP for a great first step, but not the answer to everything, because unfortunately, with the oversimplification, I think, of the idea that 1-to-3 is the best method of tutoring, it's going to have an effect, obviously, and any effect is a positive one, because even if it helps one child, that's fantastic, because we all have the same end goal here. But as a sort of outsider looking in on the scheme, I do wish that there was opportunities for providers to have a little bit more flexibility, obviously where they have proven track records in larger group teaching, and just like providing different styles of education virtually, and that's obviously something that we've discussed in our consideration of the NTP, and would obviously be something that if we were going to tender for such a program, we would definitely not just be prescribing the 1-to-3, we would be also talking about other methods of teaching that we could offer, that we feel would have even quicker results.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not an educationist per se or anything, but I can imagine the range in which children are able to learn, and the structure and the environments do change, or it varies massively. So 1-3 being the only available option, is that best for some pupils that maybe do require 1-to-1 work, or is our larger groups better for more collaborative work and team working and all that stuff? So I can see where there's maybe that a slight bit of frustration around that prescriptive nature of the NTP, but as you said, it seems like a fantastic first step into getting tutoring out there as a proper viable alternative sort of education format, really, which I think is fantastic. So
definitely,
change in between different year groups in the NTP. Are they sort of offering different things for year 3 and 4, for example?
Yeah, I mean, that's up to the providers, and that's sort of something that's looked at in the tendering process. But, as a provider, you're able to say what you can offer. Now, obviously, with the first round of the NTP, Nesta and EF, they said, you can be offering English, maths, science, modern foreign languages, and they're the kind of main key focus points for the scheme. Now, one of the changes that we've noticed by reading the sort of fine print of the documents for Randstad's phase 2 round of applications is that they really are sort of mainly focusing on English and maths, because I think they're probably looking at data from the first NTP round. And to be honest with you, that is what those subject areas that schools are mostly judged on. And remember, this is a program only for state educated pupils and disadvantaged ones at that. So really, English and maths has got to be the focus. And I think that has, that is visible in the Randstad paperwork as we've been looking through it as well. and that's where, for me, in terms of the opportunity for the children, obviously it's a program that schools in phase one were allowed, a 10 to 15 hour block per child, per disadvantaged child. Obviously, we know that the aims of the program were not necessarily totally met in terms of the amount of children they wanted to get out there and help. But like with anything like this, it's about visibility, it's about getting out there and having those conversations. And I think there was also a few issues of transparency of information, as I obviously have been fairly vocal on myself in terms of like LinkedIn and things. But I think the most important thing when there is an industry that there are, unfortunately, and obviously I say this because this is like my industry, but so many misconceptions currently still exist around. You've just got to get out there and have lots of conversations, just like what we're doing right now, so people get that window into the people who are delivering the education, who can see that actually we're all passionate educators, we all want the best for the children. And so really we should all be looking for this scheme to really start and be that bridge that's built between schools and tutors working together really positively for the good of the children.
Absolutely. And I think, while the NTP exists and it's a fantastic subsidized, option for schools where we know budgets are absolutely crucial and tight, but, there are still, tutoring still exists outside of the NTP. So, there is schools. Do you think schools should absolutely embrace, obviously, what they can get through the NTP, but actually, start exploring some of the other providers out there on a direct basis rather than through the program? Is that an option?
I mean, I think that's one of the interesting things is that, schools have been using tutors for a while. Not until before the NTP came around. So for us to think that schools are only accessing the tutoring now because of the NTP is very oversimplified. What I do think though is that it is a great window into first, like working with a company, seeing the kind of education that they can provide for a school. And I think that it's a really great opportunity for so many tutoring companies who do base their models on support for school to really show off what they can do. And that's not a bad thing. Now, obviously, with the NTP, it's very important that schools, speak to the providers, pick up the phone and actually chat to them before they actually make that decision. Because one, as we know, and this is kind of going back to what we were saying about the model of the 1 to 3, we know that all children do not learn in the same way. And as an educator, that's where I just find it a little bit strange that everything is so focused in on this 1 to 3, because as we know, what works for one child does not work it's not a one size fits all model. So I guess I just always have a little bit of a bugbear about things where it's just a one size fits all program. But, as I say, we have to look at the NTP for its strengths in terms of what it's doing for the conversations, what it's doing for the awareness of the tutoring industry, and what it's doing most importantly for the children's education.
Absolutely. That's definitely the most important thing. And I mean, just to get into, I know we've spoken a bit, we've said some upsides and some downsides. What in your view are, because we want to be objective with this, and you can only be objective if you consider both sides. So what would you say the downsides of a program like the NTP are? Maybe obviously expand on some of the stuff you just said, but any other downsides from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I always like to look on positives of everything. So for me, whilst I do question some of the transparency of phase one, it was a very rushed through program, so we have to be understanding of that. I do think some of the downsides would be that it excludes a huge amount of practitioners based on the fact that they haven't currently been working with schools. And I think that is a real shame, because we know that there are some incredible tutors out there who are ex-class teachers, who are qualified teachers, but that doesn't make them a good teacher or tutor necessarily, but they really want to get involved. And unfortunately, as an independent tutor, you obviously can't get involved in the scheme unless you work through one of the agencies. And that unfortunately means that we're going to lose out on some of the quality educators that are out there in the tutoring industry. So that's a certain downside.
Yeah.
But
and
like,
is that just, if I jump, oh, sorry, just to ask on, typically as a tutoring agency and one yourself, the majority of your work, and this might be my naive opinion, is with parents, yes?
a lot of people's,
So,
yes.
Yeah, and because one of the specific requirements of the NTP is experience working with schools. So how many agencies out there do you think have a load of experience with tutoring and schools?
And I mean, if we look at a lot of the providers from the first round that were accepted, a lot of them didn't have, I mean, there was some fantastic agencies that do have, school experience. But I think that was the slight kind of, not confusion, but that one of the issues that we, as the tutoring industry, and obviously like my work with the Tutors Association, one of the questions that we had was some of the providers that were taken on who had work with schools, for example, Pearson, exams, but absolutely no tutoring provision experience. And we found that quite strange after such a focus on, the provision being, demonstrated and tried and tested. And obviously the relationship with schools was there, but not the tutoring. And that's where, and not to be disparaging about someone else who, obviously rightly was selected, but if we're really looking at high quality provision, I think that is that was one of the things that was a downside for the first one. It disillusioned quite a lot of providers who'd put lots of time and effort into the program. They had a limited amount of experience with schools, but not extensive. And then they sort of looked at people who had actually no tutoring experience, but were selected due to the size of their corporation, and maybe just having links with schools for something else.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's the program itself is obviously not here forever, is what we're seeing. So that must be a bit of an interesting downside for you as well, is it?
Yeah, I mean, for me, as I always say, like I'm at forefront an educator, but with my sort of business hat on, I mean, putting a lot of time and effort into a program that is depreciating in focus over the next few years is always an interesting one, because I would always want to know that the projects that we're working on at Eteach Education Boutique, like we're looking really to the future. And if you know that all your hard work is going to help some children right here, right now, but then you might have to like reinvent it all again. That's like such a lot of work that's not going to be necessarily put into helping children. So for me, I'm always trying to focus on the way that we can work on things where we're not directly with the children, like consulting and project work and things like this, but that are as are going to create something as effective, but that time that we're spent working on that project is as small as it possibly can be, because we want to be working with the children. We want to be focusing on supporting them, and not our time as educators is not best spent, in a boardroom. Is spent better, actually working with the children. And so that's really, really important, because if something is depreciating, it's got limited, not limited value, because I would always, say that any value would be helping any child right here, right now. That's got huge value. But we're looking to like 10 years time, 20 years time. We're looking at how education, how tutoring are going to come together and work. It's a legacy, as opposed to just a short-term project.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's thinking 5 years. I'm not sure on the exact timescales, but you almost don't want schools to almost see this as the main method of tutoring provision, to then dwindle and be sort of removed from the budget at some point. And then where do schools go? It's almost that unfamiliarity in where will we be left at that point, in terms of how will schools interact with tutoring agencies, or will we be in a place the NTP has created such a strong link with it, on the other side, that actually it's going to be in a great place, and schools will then be able to sort of autonomously organize and arrange to work with them. So there's almost two sides of it there.
And I think the other thing that, you know, that you've just mentioned there, and sort of I always think is such an important thing, is that, you know, we weren't sure if we were going to be tendering for this second round because of this oversimplified view of the 1 to 3. And I think the interesting thing after studying the Randstad paperwork is that if you have, you know, they're saying that if you do have some experience or some, you know, actual like quantitative like results that you can prove that you've worked in a different way with children and had impact, that they will consider that as an application. So whereas before we thought it was almost like, you know, we were not going to be tendering, we were not going to be getting involved. I think now it will be interesting to see if they really are open to other methods, or whether the program really is just limited to 1 to 3.
Absolutely. So upsides then, in terms of, you know, we've given it a bit of a bash recently in terms of the NTP, but, you know, we can't deny that there are some serious positives around the program. So I mean, what would you say is the number one for you with the program?
Well, I mean, firstly, I mean, it's just helping children. Any child that's been impacted negatively needs help, and needs to re-engage and have their little spark reignited, you know, with education. So for me, anything that's going to try and outreach to those children who might have been most negatively impacted by such a crazy last, you know, 18 months, that is the full stop. You know, that's kind of the big one. But, you know, the other thing as well is that it's about the opportunity. I think that's the other thing. The opportunity, not just for teachers, tutors, not just for children, but the whole opportunity that offers to the whole education system. Like we spoke about in our first webinar, you know, this idea that the career in education is no longer just like a ladder where you enter the classroom and then you leave. This whole idea that education is really, really an amazing opportunity to forge a career that works for you. And I think that the NTP has, you know, with its focus on online being an important part of everything, because, you know, literally sometimes schools have had to close and we can't do it in person. That opportunity is something really special. And, you know, I think just hearing senior politicians, whilst we don't always agree with everything that they say, well, hearing them saying that they consider tutoring as the number one tool in the box, if you like, to help the children of the UK catch up is very powerful.
Absolutely. And, you know, the data we're seeing through Eteach now, the candidate data, is really suggesting that these new ways of working, like in the workplace, I'm sure people from businesses all over the place are obviously very much aware that people are looking for a different way of their, you know, managing their work and their life as well. You know, the flexibility, maybe the working from home, remote working, stuff like that. So tutoring is primed to, you know, be that answer for the teaching world. And I know, you know, that's going to affect a lot of schools in some cases, because, you know, they might lose teachers because they're going to be stepping away from the actual physical classroom into the tutoring world. So, you know, a solution that makes sure that we don't, you know, rob Peter to pay Paul in a way, you know, making sure that we have both options available to those children in the schools is
totally, it's so important, right? But I think that's one of the things that I'm so excited about with our partnership with Eteach and Education Boutique. So we have had to move, haven't we? So we both have to move places. The fun of filming.
Yeah, I mean, it's not quite as nice as staring out at the, what was that, some Sicilian island behind you.
It was Saint-Tropez.
Saint-Tropez, sorry, my bad. That's quite an advert for tutoring there. You know, you're on a yacht in Saint-Tropez, very nice. But Wi-Fi not always reliable.
Not always so reliable, even on my trusty hotspot. Sometimes it's not perfect. So I think what we were just saying there before we rudely got cut off is the opportunity is a really big big sort of plus for me for the NTP. You know, I think in terms of what we were saying about the you were mentioning about educators and the fact that we may lose some teachers to tutoring. But for me, as you look in on the industry, having all those different options should attract more people initially, because they'll see that it's a career that allows you to move like a web, as opposed to, being stuck in one place doing one form of teaching, for the whole career, which it has almost been, in past sort of years.
I mean, even, overseas, absolutely, that's a really exciting part of this, that, we can reach a global audience of pupils, really, in what we're doing. But even, in our own fair country here, there are serious areas of, deprivation, in terms of education provision and stuff. So, that ability, typically, a lot of coastal areas do struggle for teachers where, either there's not really links to a local university, so there's not that influx of, young professionals coming into the market. There's occasionally, that typical retirement village area on the coast. So, but if we can, tap into those areas and make sure that they have access to, quality education wherever they are, whether it's NTP or just, working with tutoring agencies alongside the schools, that's a massive plus.
And I think that kind of leads on nicely to, our whole looking to the future of education. The NTP has been a great springboard to discuss, to break down those barriers between education and tutors, education in school and tutoring. But for me, when we think of an educational legacy, do I think that the NTP is going to provide that legacy? I think it's a first step towards something actually really great being put in place, but I don't think it's the answer, would be my kind of view on it, really. And I think that's where what we're doing together at, with Eteach and Education Boutique, I think that's where it gets really exciting, because I know that some of the projects that we're working on actually could fill that gap and could provide that legacy. And as the NTP scales down, our things will ramp up, and we're going to be able to really provide some serious support and inspiration for children, because that's the most important thing.
I think, there's also, and I know we've spoken about treating this like a product, and we don't want to do that. We want to, this is a service and this is people at the end of the day. But with the NTP, I assume, the fact that schools in a way can almost try before they buy, because it is subsidized, it's not going to put additional pressure on them. It's a great way, I think, for schools to really experiment and figure out maybe how they want to, use tutoring in a much more proactive way, rather than, as we've always said, catch up, reactive, which, is obviously has its purpose, and it's almost what a lot of interactions have been based on. But what we're looking at now, I think, is that future of how do we position side by side both provisions to benefit the children in the best way.
Yeah, and I really do feel quite strongly about the fact that I understand that the NTP is a sort of a model, if you like, of getting tutoring into schools, and therefore people will see it as more of a product, if you like, that they are purchasing. But I think that when we focus too much on the business or the money side of things with education, the purpose of what we're all trying to do here can get lost. And that's why I really do feel very strongly about this overemphasis on the catch up. This catch up, it all comes from a very negative place. You are behind, so you need to catch up, and this is how you're going to do it with this work. It's removing everything that I hold important when I educate children, and that's inspiration and curiosity. It doesn't give them a springboard to sort of want to find out more, to it's a tailored package of support, and that's one of the limitations, or one of the things that I'd like to see being of central importance to such a program, because that's how we're going to inspire the children to succeed and to reach their potential, not by telling them that they're behind and they need to catch up.
Completely. And I think back to my own experience. I had to have a maths tutor when I was, I think, in my young teens, 13, 14. And I think I remember being embarrassed that I had to go and see additional support, because it was catching up. You're behind, you're not good enough. So that's a really interesting way. And, I'd be really interested to see how we combat that. because that mindset change for children, that it's not about you're behind. It's actually, it's about being even further in front. Maybe, I don't even know how we do it, but it's a really interesting point.
Yeah, and I think that maybe is another whole webinar series, isn't it? The whole positivity and mindset. And I think mindset of the educator as much as the mindset of the child, because you've been taught by an educator who does not have the correct mindset or does not have an open view of education, and is sort of reinforcing the fact that you're behind, you need to do this. For me, that's so limiting. And that's my biggest hope for tutors and teachers working together, that we can show them that learning, you don't learn maths only in your 1 hour maths lesson every day. In that maths lesson, you can learn maths any time. You're learning all the time, timing yourself on the way to school. There's so many things that you can do. And I think that any program needs to also remember that that little hour that you spend with a tutor, it's actually an enabling hour that gets the child to go into the world and think about learning all the time. It's not the 1 hour that you do with that teacher that's going to make you catch up. It's, can that teacher enable you to see the learning all around you, so that it's constantly on your mind, and so you're constantly engaged in education.
Absolutely. Yeah, brilliant. So Lucy, if I was to say, if you're a school and you've not engaged with the NTP yet so far, or ahead of this new selection and the second phase, what would you recommend they do as a school, when it comes to embracing this? Like, what do you think some good advice for the schools?
Yeah, it's a great question. Now, obviously, the schools know their children inside out. So there's no advice I can give about, that like every school will know the children that they feel would be disadvantaged through the coronavirus pandemic, So I think, firstly, speaking and having conversations with a couple of providers, as many as you can, in fact, just to feel like there's huge differences between providers. They will have specialists, there'll be people that work more specifically with special educational needs children. Having conversations is so important. Doing research in terms of looking up the on the websites of the providers, on their social media, to see like what kind of things they put out there, to see if it's what you're looking for the children that you need supporting. Choosing times of day obviously would be really important. So really, any good provider will ask you lots of questions to make sure that they can match you with the best provision. So if you do feel that during a process of discussion you're not being asked lots of questions, maybe that's a sign that that provider's not for you, because all the good providers that we know, you will have a barrage of questions thrown at you to allow.
It's because that whole conversation, that dialogue you're recommending there, obviously we know that now under the next phase, there's Randstad are managing it in a way using a portal. So hopefully there's a way that it's not just grab a tutor out of a machine and then you go. There is an opportunity to properly talk to the provider and stuff like that. I don't know if you know much about that side of things, but.
And I mean, that's one of the good things about the tutoring industry, is even the largest tutoring providers are not, absolutely massive. As an industry, we're made up of quite small, businesses. And I think that's because of the personal nature that tutoring, provides. You know, and obviously with that there is the opportunity that someone is going to become that leading player, if you like, in a business. But with all honesty, like, that's not the most important thing for an educator. The most important thing is providing the best quality service and matching a school with the best tutor to meet that child's needs, and inspiring and engaging them. Now, whether that can be done within the confines of the 15 hours and the 1 to 3 and whatever, choosing the children to go together in those 1 to 3 groups would definitely be something that schools will be personality matching aspect there as well, and complement each other, and one person's not going to dominate. There's all sorts of things that schools will need to consider, but they're definitely best placed to do that.
Awesome. So I think obviously as we're approaching probably, you know, the 45-minute mark now, you know, in summary, as we said, we were on the fence a bit, weren't we, in terms of whether we were going to bid for the NTP and then, you know, put a bid in for us. So, you know, I think we've decided that we are going to do that. We're going to enter it as Eteach as well, but we want to really promote and push some ideas their way as well, because we, as you know, yourself, always thinking outside the box, aren't you? And I think you did mention a few ideas you wanted to suggest. I don't know if you want to talk about them a little bit.
Yeah, and I was definitely off the fence. I was never on the fence. But I think the most important thing is that now that Randstad have said that they will, you know, they will consider other provision methods, that's when, after, you know, a meeting that we had with them, that was interesting to me. And so that then sort of showed that they're curious, you know, they're not quite as limited to that 1 to 1 or 1 to 3 that previously Nesta and the EEF were. Obviously, but I think the thing is that so why should a provision of tutoring also aim to teach every child in the same way? 10 hours, 15 hours, 1 to 3, 1 to 1. I mean, there's no, when we look at the evidence that's created, this is the model. It's not hugely tried and tested, as with a lot of tutoring. And that's obviously something that we're really focusing on, the fact that there's not enough data about tutoring. And obviously the EEF and Nesta have done a lot of more, you know, there needs to be more for us as an industry to be taken seriously. So that is going to be interesting. And I think any provision that's looking to go for the NTP should definitely also be looking at data collection in terms of not the children and the schools, but I mean in terms of like testing methods and, you know, showing off what they can do and the impact that they can have. And I know that's something that's really important in the NTP provision application as well. And that's really great to see. So yeah.
Absolutely. It just seems it's at a really exciting point in the tutoring world, but just the teaching world in general, coming out of COVID, lockdowns, etc. You know, there's a lot of talk around, you know, change now, which I think is really healthy. I know you're a big advocate for, you know, shaking things up and, you know, always doing something different. So it's, we're on a bit of a voyage of discovery. But yeah, I mean, as Eteach will be putting a bid in, and, you know, just going back to as we started working with yourself, you know, we've been really fortunate with our, you know, the way our system's set up, our job board, and this is where we're seeing such an appetite for tutoring is, you know, just the few communications and messages we put out, you know, hundreds and hundreds of teachers or education professionals have registered interest. So, we're looking forward to putting that in. And I think it's a really healthy debate. So if obviously there are any reactions to this, we would love to hear people's opinions and thoughts, and there will be a contact information bit below this video, but please interact with our blogs. Lots of stuff coming out. And is there anything else you want to say, Lucy?
Yeah, I was just going to say, in terms of, you know, people might sort of say, well, it will be thinking about, you know, what, like the pros and cons of getting involved or not getting involved. And I think for us, it came down to that if it wasn't going to be us, it was going to be someone else. So we wanted to be able to help in the way that we know that we can help, to support in the way that we know we can support, and to inspire children, hopefully through the methods that we know we have used previously that have really inspired great results. And, you know, I think from your experience of working with schools so regularly, and having those really great relationships, for, you know, for Eteach, it was kind of a no-brainer. Yeah,
absolutely. Amazing. Great. Well, I will let you get back to your yacht.
Yes. Well, I am working though. Don't make it sound like I'm on holiday. We all know I don't take holidays.
This is true. But I think I'd much rather your office than my office right now.
Even with my dodgy internet connection.
Yes,
but hey.
Amazing. But yeah, thanks so much, Lucy. Lovely to talk with you. And I'll see you for our next episode, which is going to be a live webinar. We'll hopefully see a load of people tuning in. And what are we going to be talking about on that one, Lucy? Good
question. That is going to be below this video. And it's going to be kind of like a live discussion about all things NTP. It's going to be all like the decision for us to join together as well, and the future of education. So it's going to be kind of all encompassing, the three kind of all together. But everything obviously with this webinar series has all been about the future of education and where we see you know, the NTP obviously being part of that, or being a springboard to that. And so yeah, it should be really good.
Exciting. Awesome.
And I will not be on the yacht, so I'll have good internet.
No, yeah, I think we'll probably be in the same room for once.
Yes.
Amazing. Right, take care, Lucy. Thanks so much. See you later.
See you later. Bye.